At midnight, shadows whisper truths that daylight buries. In the quiet corners of ordinary towns, where life moves at a comfortable pace, darkness can take root. It can wear a neighbor's face, borrow a friendly smile, and wait. Welcome to Midnight Crime. Tonight, we don't just explore a case. We unravel a life, or rather, lives. We delve into a story that twisted the very definition of identity, blurring the line between profound mental illness and calculated, predatory evil. This is the story of a killer who wore so many faces that, for a time, he had no face at all. One of his victims, a survivor who escaped his grasp, would later tell investigators he was like two different people, switched on and off like a light. The press, in their hunger for a headline that could capture such a chilling duality, dubbed him the Janus Killer, after the two-faced Roman god of beginnings and endings, of doorways and transitions. A fitting name for a man who was both the welcoming neighbor and the bringer of death. But this is no myth. This is not a story from ancient Rome. This is the story of a real monster. A man who moved through the world like a phantom, collecting identities like souvenirs. And this is the story of how he fooled an entire town, a loving family, and a system that was not prepared for a man who simply, on paper, did not exist. This is the story of Owen Marlow. The clock ticking fades slightly, joined by the gentle sound of autumn wind whistling. Part 1. The Perfect Tenant. Our story begins in Coldbrook, Massachusetts. If you were to draw a picture of quintessential New England, it would look like Coldbrook. Population, just under 5,000. A town built around a single main street, a white steepled church, and a shared sense of history. It's the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where the local grocer knows your name, and where the biggest news is usually the high school football team's latest victory. It is, by all accounts, a safe place. And it was this very sense of safety that made it the perfect hunting ground. In the crisp air of September 2015, a man calling himself Daniel Royce arrived in Coldbrook. He was looking for a quiet life, or so he said. He found it in the basement apartment of a small, tidy home at the edge of town, owned by 82-year-old widow Lorraine Fields. Lorraine was the heart of her neighborhood. A retired librarian, she spent her days tending to her prize-winning roses and baking for church fundraisers. Her husband had passed away a decade prior, and her daughter, Marianne, lived a county over. Renting out the basement was less about the money and more about the company, the quiet assurance of another soul in the house. Here is Lorraine's daughter, Marianne, recalling her mother's first impressions of the new tenant. Marianne, Mom called me the day he moved in. She was so pleased. "He's a perfect gentleman, Annie," she said. "He carried in his own boxes, wiped his feet on the mat every time, and spoke so softly you had to lean in to hear him." He told her he was an accountant, working remotely, and needed a place where he could focus. He paid his first 2 months' rent right there, in cash. Early. Mom thought it was a godsend. Daniel Royce was, by all outward appearances, the perfect tenant. He was in his early 30s, clean-cut, with unassuming features. He was neither handsome nor ugly. He was instantly forgettable. Neighbors would later struggle to describe him, offering vague recollections of a man who seemed to want to blend into the background. He kept to himself. The lights in the basement apartment were rarely on. Music was never heard. No visitors ever came or went. His car, a nondescript sedan, would disappear after sunset and reappear before sunrise. He was a ghost who paid his rent on time. But there were oddities, small things, easily dismissed at first. Marianne. Mom mentioned once that he didn't seem to own a television or a radio. She'd offered him her old set, and he just politely refused. Said he preferred the quiet. Another time, she baked him a loaf of her famous zucchini bread. She left it on the steps for him. It sat there for 2 days, untouched. When she asked him about it, he just said, "Oh, Mrs. Fields, I'm so sorry. I have allergies." But he couldn't name a single one. The most unsettling detail was the darkness. Neighbors who lived across the street noted that the basement windows were perpetually black. Not just dark, but black, as if covered from the inside. No flicker of a television, no glow from a computer screen, not even the sliver of light from a bedside lamp. It was a void. Lorraine, in her trusting nature, chalked it up to eccentricity. He was an accountant, after all. Perhaps he worked odd hours. Perhaps he was just a very private person. In a world that was growing louder and more intrusive, she respected his desire for solitude. She would see him in the yard sometimes, always at dusk, and he would offer a small, tight-lipped smile and a nod before retreating back into his subterranean apartment. For 3 months, this strange, silent arrangement continued. September bled into October. The vibrant New England foliage turned to brown, and the first hints of winter chilled the air. Daniel Royce continued to pay his rent early. Lorraine Fields continued to tend her garden. The town of Colebrook continued to feel safe. They were all wrong. A sudden, sharp clap of thunder. The gentle wind turns into the sound of heavy, pouring rain. Part 2. The Disappearance. December 18th, 2015. A Friday. The air was cold and damp, threatening snow. Christmas lights twinkled along Main Street, casting a festive glow that felt a world away from the silent house at the edge of town. Marianne Fields had a weekly ritual. Every Friday afternoon, she would drive the 40 minutes to Colebrook to have tea with her mother. They'd catch up, gossip about the town, and plan their weekend. It was a routine as reliable as the town clock. But on this Friday, the routine was broken. Marianne, I pulled into the driveway around 3 p.m. The first thing I noticed was the front door. It was ajar, just a crack. My mom, she never did that. She was meticulous about locking her doors. I called out for her from the porch. "Mom?" No answer. I got this cold feeling. It was like walking into a photograph. Everything was in its place, but the life was gone. Inside, the house was eerily still. A half-finished crossword puzzle lay on the coffee table. Lorraine's reading glasses were perched on top. In the kitchen, the teapot on the stove was still warm to the touch. 2 mugs were on the counter, one with a tea bag still in it. It was as if she had vanished mid-motion. Her purse was on its hook by the door. Her phone was on the charger. Her winter coat was in the closet. And most telling of all, her cane, the one she relied on to walk more than a few steps, was leaning against her favorite armchair. Lorraine Fields was gone. Marianne, her voice trembling, called 911. A snippet of a 911 call. Marianne's voice is panicked but clear. 911, operator. 911. What's your emergency? Marianne. My mother, she's gone. I'm at her house. The door was open. The tea is still warm, but she's not here. Her cane is here. She can't walk without her cane. The Colebrook Police Department arrived within minutes. Led by Detective Miles Harris, a 30-year veteran of the force, they began what they initially treated as a missing person case involving a vulnerable elderly woman. Maybe she'd wandered off, confused. Maybe she'd fallen in the yard. Detective Harris, however, felt the same chill Marianne had. Detective Harris, you walk into enough crime scenes, you develop a sense for them. This wasn't a wander-off. This was a removal. The scene was too perfect. Too staged. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. It was like she just evaporated. We immediately went downstairs to talk to the tenant, Daniel Royce. But there was no one to talk to. When officers knocked on the basement door, there was no answer. When they forced it open, they found a space that was not just empty, but sterile. Detective Harris. The place was a tomb, not a single personal item. No clothes in the closet, no food in the fridge. The bed was stripped, the mattress bare. It wasn't just clean, it was forensically clean. We ran a swab in the sink drain, and the smell of bleach was overwhelming. He hadn't just moved out, he had erased himself. That's when we knew. This wasn't a missing person case anymore. This was a homicide. The man known as Daniel Royce was gone. His car was gone. All that remained was an empty, bleach-scented room and the lingering, terrifying question, where was Lorraine Fields? A statewide manhunt was launched. News outlets picked up the story, plastering the name Daniel Royce and a vague description across television screens. An 82-year-old grandmother had vanished, and her mysterious tenant was the only suspect. But the police immediately hit a wall, a massive, impenetrable wall. Because Daniel Royce didn't exist. A low, tense drone begins to build under the narration. Part 3. Faces and Lies. The investigation into the disappearance of Lorraine Fields quickly became a hunt for a ghost. The name Daniel Royce was a dead end. The Social Security number he'd provided on his rental application belonged to a man from Oregon who had died in 1994. The previous landlord he'd listed as a reference? The address was a vacant lot in upstate New York. The phone number was disconnected. The car he drove, the unassuming sedan, was unregistered. It had no plates, or more likely, plates that were stolen and discarded. He had paid for everything in cash, leaving no paper trail. He was a phantom who had drifted into Coldbrook, committed an unspeakable act, and drifted away again, leaving nothing but a fake name and a void. Detective Harris. We had nothing. No fingerprints in the apartment that weren't Lorraine's, no digital footprint, no real name. We were chasing a whisper. For weeks, the case went cold. We were interviewing neighbors for the 10th time, getting the same vague answers. He was quiet. He kept to himself. He was a blank slate. The investigators had only one card left to play: DNA. The bleach hadn't washed away everything. Deep within the plumbing of the basement sink, crime scene technicians found a single strand of hair. It wasn't Lorraine's. They ran it through CODIS, the national DNA database, and they got a hit, a shocking one. The DNA didn't give them a name, but it did give them a history. It was a match to two other unsolved murders. The first, from 2012, was in a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. The victim, 78-year-old Arthur Gable, a retired postal worker. He had been found suffocated in his home. His mysterious new tenant, a man who called himself John, had vanished. The second match was from 2014 in a coastal town in Maine. The victim, 85-year-old Eleanor Vance. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Her quiet tenant, a supposed writer named Michael, had disappeared without a trace. Detective Harris. It was a punch to the gut. Our missing person case just exploded. We weren't looking for a local suspect anymore. We were looking for a serial killer, a transient predator who targeted the elderly, gained their trust, and then erased them. 3 states, 1 ghost. The FBI was brought in. A multi-state task force was formed. They had the killer's DNA, but they still didn't have his face or his name. Working with the few neighbors who had gotten a glimpse of Daniel Royce, they put together a composite sketch. It was the face of a man who could be anyone. Brown hair, medium build, plain features. The only distinguishing characteristic, according to one neighbor, was his eyes. They were cold, the neighbor said. Like a doll's eyes. The sketch was released to the national media, and that's when the floodgates opened. A montage of phone ringing SFX, overlapping with snippets of voices. Tip line caller 1. Yes, I'm calling about the sketch on the news. That guy? He taught my kids' night class in ceramics last year. At the community college. He called himself Mr. Grayson. He was so good with the kids. Tip line caller 2. Yeah, I think I know that guy. He worked at the dog shelter with me for a few months. Went by Luke. Real quiet. The dogs loved him though. Weird. Tip line caller 3. That's him. That's the man I dated for 6 months. He told me his name was David. He said he was a freelance photographer. He left one morning and I never heard from him again. Oh my God. The calls poured in from a dozen states. He was a handyman in Pennsylvania named Chris, a bookstore clerk in Virginia named Sam, a volunteer firefighter in Oregon named Ben. Different names, different jobs, different towns. But it was always the same man. The same forgettable face. The same cold, doll-like eyes. The FBI began to piece together a terrifying portrait of the killer they now called the Chameleon. He was a master of social camouflage. He would slip into a community, create a plausible, mundane identity, and exist within it for months, sometimes even a year. He wasn't just putting on a mask, he was building a life, only to dismantle it and move on to the next. He never stayed in one place for long. He never formed deep connections. He was a social predator, using kindness and trust as his weapons. And his preferred victims were the most vulnerable among us, the lonely, the elderly, the trusting. The man who called himself Daniel Royce was not just a killer. He was a void shaped like a person, a collection of stolen lives and fabricated stories. And he was still out there. The tense drone swells and then cuts abruptly. Part 4, The Breakthrough. The winter of 2015 turned into the spring of 2016. The snow in Colebrook melted, revealing the damp earth, but there was still no sign of Lorraine Fields. Hope had begun to curdle into a grim certainty. The task force followed lead after lead, chasing down sightings of Luke, Mr. Grayson, and a dozen other aliases, but the chameleon was always one step ahead. He seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only the echoes of the lives he pretended to live. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected of places. Not from a high-tech surveillance operation or a brilliant piece of detective work, but from the simple observation of a postal worker in rural Vermont. On April 12, 2016, a man named George Finney was on his route in a sparsely populated area near the Green Mountains. He was a creature of habit, and he noticed things. For the past few months, he'd noticed a man living in a remote, rundown cabin at the end of a long dirt road. This man was different. Here is George Finney speaking to a local news crew. George Finney, yeah, I'd see him now and then. He got mail under the name Robert Miller. Kept to himself. But the odd thing was he only ever came out to the mailbox after dark. I'd leave the mail in the afternoon, and the next morning it'd be gone. And he paid for his post office box in cash, a year in advance. Just seemed off. Then I saw that sketch in the paper. I looked at it, and I looked at it again, and I said to my wife, that's him, that's the night guy. George Finney called the FBI tip line. Within hours, the quiet dirt road was swarming with federal agents. They set up surveillance on the small, isolated cabin. It was the perfect hideout. Remote, unassuming, with a clear view of anyone approaching. For 2 days, they watched and waited. On the evening of April 14th, under the cover of darkness, a figure emerged from the cabin. He walked to the mailbox, retrieved his letters, and turned to go back inside. That's when they moved in. Muffled shouts of, FBI, hands in the air, don't move, followed by the sound of running feet on gravel. The man who called himself Robert Miller did not resist. He did not run. He simply dropped the mail, raised his hands, and sank to his knees. When they asked him his name, he was silent. Inside the cabin, the agents found a meticulously organized world of deception. It was a killer's workshop. Agent Ramirez, the cabin was chilling. On one table, there were stacks of books on how to change your appearance, how to create a new identity, how to beat a polygraph. On another, there was a collection of burner phones, each labeled with a different name. Luke, Dog Shelter, Chris, Handyman. There were wigs, fake glasses, sets of clothing for different personas, blue-collar work shirts, a professor's tweed jacket. And then they found the trophies. In a locked footlocker under the bed, they found a horrifying collection. Small labeled plastic bags containing locks of hair, gray, blonde, brown. A small box filled with jewelry, a silver locket, a simple gold wedding band, a pair of pearl earrings, and in a small jar, a collection of human teeth. It was a museum of murder, a catalog of stolen lives. The final, devastating discovery was in the back of the cabin, a large, unplugged chest freezer. The agents pried it open. Inside, wrapped in industrial plastic, was the body of Lorraine Fields. A moment of complete silence. Just dead air. For 3 full seconds. Part 5, the interrogation. The man in custody refused to speak. For 48 hours, he sat in a sterile interrogation room, staring at the two-way mirror, his face a perfect mask of calm. He gave them no name, no confession, no reaction. He simply existed. But the FBI now had something more powerful than a confession. They had his fingerprints. They had his face. They ran them through every database they had. And finally, the ghost got a name. His real name was Owen Marlow. Born in 1982 in rural Pennsylvania. The records painted a bleak picture. He was the product of a broken, violent home. His father was an alcoholic with a long history of domestic abuse. His mother, a victim herself, had abandoned the family when Owen was 6. He and his younger sister were placed in the foster care system, where they were separated. After that, the trail went cold. No criminal record. No driver's license. No credit history. After the age of 16, Owen Marlow had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. Until he started killing. The lead interrogator was FBI Special Agent Isabella Ramirez. She decided to take a different approach. She walked into the room, sat down, and didn't ask a single question about the murders. She asked about his childhood. She asked about his sister. And for the first time, the mask cracked. Agent Ramirez. He was a stone wall until I mentioned his sister Sarah. We'd found records that she had died of an overdose at 19. When I said her name, he flinched. It was the first human reaction we'd seen. He looked at me and his eyes, they changed. The coldness was gone. It was like someone else was looking out. He started to talk, and he didn't stop for 6 hours. The story Owen Marlow told was a fractured, terrifying journey into a shattered mind. He spoke about his life, but he spoke about it in the third person. He described himself as 2 separate people, sharing one body. There was Owen, the good one, the quiet boy who loved animals and just wanted to be left alone, the one who felt shame and fear. And then there was Damien, Agent Ramirez. He called him Damien. He said Damien was the one who came out when Owen was scared or angry. Damien was the one who knew how to lie, how to manipulate. Damien was the one who protected him. And Damien was the one who killed. He spoke about the murders as if he were a spectator. He'd say, Damien made me watch, or I would wake up, and Damien had done something bad again. He claimed he never meant to hurt Lorraine Fields. He said Owen genuinely liked her. She reminded him of a kind librarian from his childhood. He said she was different from the others. Agent Ramirez. He told us that Lorraine had figured it out. He said one afternoon she came down to the basement to bring him some soup. He was having a bad day, as he put it. He was talking to himself. He said she looked at him and her face wasn't scared, it was sad. She supposedly said to him, "There are 2 of you in there, aren't there, son?" He said that's when Damien took over. Because she saw both of them. Was it a genuine case of dissociative identity disorder, DID, forged in the crucible of horrific childhood abuse? Or was it the masterful, last-ditch manipulation of a cunning sociopath? Psychiatric evaluations were ordered. The results were ambiguous. One expert diagnosed him with severe DID. Another concluded he was a malingerer, faking the symptoms to build an insanity defense. The prosecution, unsurprisingly, sided with the latter. They argued that Damien was not an alternate personality. It was a name Owen Marlow gave to his own evil. Owen Marlow stood trial in the fall of 2017. The media circus was intense. He was the Janus Killer, the man with 2 faces. Throughout the trial, he showed no emotion. He sat impassively as the prosecution detailed his crimes, as the families of his victims gave their impact statements. He only broke his composure once. It was when the prosecution displayed a photo of Lorraine Fields' home. In the corner of the photo, sitting on the porch railing, was Lorraine's ginger cat Marmalade. When the photo appeared on the screen, Owen Marlow, the man who had murdered at least 6 people in cold blood, began to weep, quietly, uncontrollably. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But for Owen Marlow, the story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Part 6, The Letters. Supermax Prison is a world of concrete and silence, a place designed to entomb the most dangerous individuals, to cut them off from the world. But Owen Marlow found a way to reach out. He began to write letters. At first, they were just to his court-appointed lawyer, then to the journalists who had covered his trial. Soon, he was writing to the families of his victims, to true crime authors, to random strangers whose names he'd plucked from a phone book. Hundreds of letters, thousands of pages, a torrent of ink from the silent man. And the letters were as fractured as the mind they came from. The sound of gentle scratch of a pen on paper. Each one was signed differently. Some were signed Owen Marlow. These were filled with remorse, with confusion. They were written in a neat, almost childlike cursive. Owen, I am so sorry for the pain he caused. I was asleep when it happened. I live in the dark and he lives in the light. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't want this. I never wanted this. Other letters were signed Damien. The handwriting was sharp, angry, slanted. The language was crude, arrogant, and chilling. Damien, you think you have me in a cage? You only caged the weak one. I'm still here. I can see you all. That old biddy in Coldbrook? She knew what I was. She saw both faces, and she paid the price for it. They all did. And then there were other letters, signed with names no one could trace. The Watcher, Mr. Nobody. The Passenger. Each had a distinct tone, a different story to tell. His prison cell had become a stage, and he was performing a one-man play with a cast of dozens. The letters were dismissed by the authorities as more games, more manipulations, a narcissist craving attention. But one letter, sent to a Boston Globe reporter in 2019, changed everything. It was signed simply, The Gardener. The letter was a poem, a rambling, cryptic verse about trees and stones and forgotten things. But embedded within it were what looked like geographical coordinates. Agent Ramirez, the reporter sent it to us. We almost threw it out. It looked like nonsense. But one of our analysts, a young guy, a puzzle nut, he stayed up all night with it. He realized the numbers weren't coordinates. They were directions, paces, and landmarks. From the broken oak, walk 100 steps toward the morning sun. The directions led a team of FBI agents and state police to a remote section of the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire, a place Owen Marlow had no known connection to. They followed the letter's instructions. From a lightning-scarred oak tree, they walked east. They passed a large moss-covered boulder. They stopped at a small clearing. The letter said, "Dig where the wildflowers don't grow." They dug. The rhythmic, grim sound of shovels hitting dirt and rock. 2 feet down, they found bones. Forensic analysis revealed the remains of 3 separate individuals, a man and 2 women. They had been buried for years. Their identities were unknown. They were not listed in any missing persons database. They were, like their killer, ghosts, forgotten victims of the man with too many faces. The discovery sent a new wave of terror through the law enforcement community. How many more were there? How many other secret gardens had he planted? Owen Marlow was questioned. He said nothing. He just smiled. Conclusion: the faces remain. Narrator Owen Marlow is still alive today, housed in the most secure wing of a federal penitentiary. He is 42 years old. He will die in that concrete box, and he is still writing. The debate around him continues to rage. Is he a tragic textbook case of dissociative identity disorder? A man so broken by childhood trauma that his mind splintered into pieces to survive? Or is he a uniquely intelligent and manipulative psychopath? A super predator who crafted a brilliant defense to escape true responsibility for his monstrous acts. A case study in the masks that evil can wear. Some of the families of his victims believe he is genuinely ill. Others are certain he is faking. Agent Ramirez, the woman who got him to confess, remains torn. Agent Ramirez, I've sat with hundreds of killers. I can usually see the lie. With Owen, I don't know. Sometimes I'd look in his eyes and see a scared little boy. Other times I'd see something ancient and cold. Maybe they're both in there. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing of all. The town of Coldbrook, Massachusetts, never fully recovered. The house where Lorraine Fields lived was sold, but the new owners say sadness lingers there. Her rose bushes still bloom every summer, tended to by neighbors. Lorraine Fields became more than a victim. She became a symbol of trust betrayed, of kindness exploited. A cautionary tale about the quiet man, the perfect tenant, the friendly stranger. Her story, and the story of all of Owen Marlow's victims, is a chilling reminder. It reminds us that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones who look like monsters. They are the ones who look just like us, the ones who move in downstairs, who teach our children, who smile at us in the grocery store. The Janus Killer may be behind bars, but the questions he raised remain. How well do we ever really know anyone? And how many faces are hiding behind the ones we see every day? The single, heavy clock ticking returns. It ticks for 5 seconds. This was the story of the Janus Killer. Join us next time when the clock strikes 12. You've been listening to Midnight Crime.